Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm joined today by Stefan. I got to know Stefan through the comment section, actually. There's actually people that watch these videos, which is very encouraging. He had a lot of insightful and interesting comments on the last video I did with my brother. And I contacted him to see if he wanted to talk, and he did, which is amazing. One of the many perks of the internet, I guess. And Stefan attended the Mannheim festival. Was it last week?
Yeah, last week, Friday to Sunday, right?
And
So exactly 1 week ago, I got back home.
that's awesome. I'm very excited to hear about your experience there. And before we do that, I actually just want to get to know a bit more about you, uh,
Yeah, sure.
your story, what you want to tell. You can tell. Thank you.
Oh wow, that's a start for that. Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for reaching out to me so quickly. And indeed, it's been wonderful that the internet it goes a long way. Back then, it used to be like writing letters, and by now it's just an email or looking up a profile on LinkedIn and seeing, okay, yeah, there's a professional mail, and I just check that, and then 5 minutes later, I found your mail in the inbox, and that's how quick that goes.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely fantastic that you're so engaged with your videos and with your comment section as well. And who would have thought? Here I am. So maybe just for a bit of background, I've been part of this little corner, or the Bridges of Meaning Discord, for I think about 2.5 3 years now. I've been a Christian from my upbringing onwards, and I have not gone through a deconstruction or reconstruction in that sense, though I have had some significant changes in the outlook of my faith, in a sense that I started as one could say, charismatic evangelical from childhood to youth to early adulthood. My parents were part of youth mission in Europe, in Germany and the Netherlands, back in the early 80s until the 90s. So there's a lot of background that I received from that. And then in my early adulthood, I actually got baptized with the Baptists, a very charismatic Baptist community in my area. And then I got married in the Protestant State Church, and have been a member ever since of it, and have really enjoyed the liturgy of that. But at one point, it really drew me closer to asking questions, looking at the sources of Christianity, at the patristics, at the church fathers, at history. And yeah, from that onwards, actually, I've had a few, one could say, numinous relationships with God and experiences that drove me closer to the Catholic Church. And by now, I'm visiting regularly the Mass, participating in Eucharist, praying the Rosary. And I would not have thought that I would get there at this point. So I'm 40. That as a background information. I'm married. I have 3 wonderful children. We live in the Palatinate area of Germany, southwest Germany, wine growing area. And I have a South African father and a German mother. I have a twin sister and a younger sister. And I've also lived in the Netherlands and in South Africa. So
Wow.
that's just a bit of background. And professionally, I'm a federal officer at the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees in Germany, responsible for asylum casework. And yeah, in my part-time, in my free time, I read a lot of stuff that floats around this little corner. And as you can see from the back of my library, I'm a total freak for Goethe.
Oh, that's exciting.
Has like 5 or 6 biographies of Goethe and all stuff related to him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's just in short who I am.
Okay,
You
amazing.
can ask anything you want.
Well, I'm very interested in the Goethe part for sure, but I think I'm gonna leave that for a bit later on. You lived in the Netherlands as well. Where did you live?
In Zoetermeer.
Oh, that's very close. It's right behind me. I live in The Hague, so it's like a
Oh,
tram
cool.
stop away.
Yeah.
It's where
I
I
mean, I
got
lived there. I
these
lived there
chairs.
when I was a young kid, or like 4 to 6, 7-ish,
Okay.
or let's say 3. I think it was 2. Yeah, it was. I think almost 3 to 4 years there. Yeah. I went to Montessori kindergarten there, and
Ah, okay. Yeah, yeah.
before being schooled in, we actually moved back to Germany, and then I stopped speaking in Dutch and in English. I only wanted to continue in German, which my father was very disappointed of. But that's how things go.
Did you learn Afrikaans as well?
Yeah, for 1 or 2 school years, because in South Africa, if you want to do the German Abitur at the German school there, you first have to go through the Matrikel,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the South African equivalent of graduation, and that's in grade 12. And so we had like from grade 7 onwards, we had beginning Afrikaans lessons, because then the exams would have been in German, English, and in Afrikaans. But
Mm.
before that happened, my family split up, and my mother and we siblings moved back to Germany,
Mm.
and my dad stayed in South Africa. So
Okay.
I never had to go through that terrible experience of having to speak Afrikaans, because truth be told, it sounds like you take the Dutch and just butcher it with the axe.
Yes.
All
Yes,
the
exactly.
softness is lost. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a German. It's like Germanizing. It's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
with
feel that.
TK and S, a very sharp language.
Okay. Um, I'm very interested by this part of your story where you keep, I don't know, like evolving your faith, let's say, keeps changing in a sense. And more interestingly, I think that I find it fascinating that you didn't deconstruct or reconstruct from your faith at a young age because it seems so normal to do. I mean, in the Netherlands, it's normal. I don't know how it is in Germany, but I feel that it might be similar. What do you think made it that you didn't go away from your faith?
Well, I think for one thing, it's been like for decades already a fact in Germany that um, Germans are generally nominalistically Christian, but they're not really deep faith
I
Christians.
see.
So, and that wasn't the case like 20 years ago either, or like 30 years ago. My parents, they in the early 80s married, and they were part of German and European youth ministry, and they were deemed to be outright weirdos, like missionary work in like the center of a German town,
Yeah.
and talking about Jesus and the Bible, and people scoffed at it and said, "Wow, this is like Hare Krishna style, really
Yeah.
stuff. Like, what are you about?" Esoteric stuff. So nobody cares about that in Germany. I mean, everyone goes to church on Easter and on Christmas, and so it's still part of the culture. But um, it's been a rare experience um, meeting people that actually said, "Yeah, I'm serious about that.
Mm. Yeah.
I think there's something to Jesus and to the Holy Spirit and to the stories of the Bible, and that's not just some myth or history or culture, but actually it's really down to earth, and I live in that reality.
Mm.
So in a sense, I grew up as being like this part of a somewhat sidelined weirdo subculture, and so in a sense, it's never been mainstream, and maybe that's the reason that I never fell out of it, because it's like, okay, where do you fall into?
Yeah.
Like, okay, you fall into basically nobody believes it, but still fake it till you make it. I don't know how that's
Yeah, yeah.
supposed to work out.
And then you switched. You switched denominations in a sense. You got
Yeah, I mean,
baptized
my
and yeah.
parents were, and in part, my mother still very centered in the evangelical movements. My mother is Pentecostal,
Mm-hmm.
church going, and I've dealt with the questions myself with charisms, and I'm a kind of what you could say semi-cessationist. So I believe that some charisms still exist, but not necessarily all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you can apply them, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a loss if you don't, which is what I think of speaking in tongues,
Mm.
for
I hear you.
example.
Yeah.
But I've been part of a community myself where it was absolutely normal in youth church to have people do that and roll on the floor and that kind of stuff. So I've been living in these for most Christians very fringe
Yeah,
parts
yeah.
of Christianity.
I hear you.
But um I had this one fallout moment in our youth church where it was about like, do we want to do the Lord's Supper? And everyone was like, yeah, sure. How we do that? And it was like, we have some snacks, we have cookies, and we have drinks, and maybe we can do it with that. And I was like, ah, if that's really what we can do, then it means actually nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the deal with this?
Yeah.
And then you look into the history of the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper, and look at the history of my own church in the area I live in, which is really interesting because it's basically a unionized church of Lutheran and Zwinglian Protestant churches that got together and said we're going to make this one church.
Mm-hmm.
But all the Lutheran stuff has been kicked out.
Yeah.
So it's a purely Zwinglian interpretation of just this kind of course it's a symbolic act, but nothing more than that. It's just a remembrance meal.
Mm.
And then I started to wonder, has it always been that way? And then you look at Luther himself, and I mean, he was really, compared to today's standards, he was really close to Catholic Church. And his teachings about transubstantiation, consubstantiation is, rather minute detail, one could say. It's like on an ontological level, it's maybe a difference, but not much of a difference. Whereas Zwingli like killed the whole thing and said, let's get rid of any ontology. It's just
I see.
right. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's look a bit further back, and you find the Didache and the church fathers and what they say of the Eucharist, and it's like, wow, they were really serious about this. So what's about these 2000 years of church history that I haven't experienced yet? And then you look at some chapters like John 6, and you stumble upon it and say, well, Jesus actually doubles down on saying, yeah, this is my body, this is my blood.
Yeah.
And in exactly similar parts, saying something about something differently, he really actually backs down and says, no, I meant it this way. But there he says, no, you really understand me there. I meant it exactly that way. And that's like, okay, this is serious.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the propositional intellectual endeavor I've taken with this special thing that's called Eucharist. But apart from that, I've had really strange experiences like visions and dreams.
Okay. Tell me more.
Like I had this one dream where I was just walking on a field road, and suddenly this rather big cat came running across the street, and it turns out that it wasn't a cat, but it was actually a lamb. And that lamb wasn't white, but it was blood red. And it just looked at me and said, I'm calling you into the union of the church.
Wow.
And that's when I woke up and I was like, holy cow, what was that? And then, I mean, the symbolism of that is like obvious. It's
Yeah.
like really obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a different dream as well, that I was walking with my wife through an old city, German city, and we just looked at the old buildings, and we went to a church, and there was a woman explaining the Eucharist. And I said to my wife, oh, well, that's basically just the same way we do it at our church. Which when I woke up, I realized implied that I was Catholic in that dream. That was really interesting as well. So, and then I had a third dream. My wife and I, we've been married for almost 17 years now. And I dreamt that I went to the altar with her to the marriage proceedings, and her grandfather was the bishop that was doing the ceremony, and he was actually holding two of these bishop staffs in his hands and had this bishop hat on. And so when you have that intellectual journey, and then you have those dreams, you really start to think that maybe God is calling you to something.
Yeah.
And at one point, I just had to try it out. And that was actually this year. In January, Matthias from the German language chat, kicked a few of us and said, why don't we participate together in this Catholic program called Exodus 90, which is a program of fasting and prayer and companionship, with weekly meetings, and you have an anchor brother that, you know, gets in contact with you and you talk things through. And that's 90 days. That's like extended Lent. And it includes also like cold showers.
Nice.
Which was like, and I read this one book. I don't, that's a Dutchman as well. The Iceman.
Yeah,
He wrote a
Wim
book.
Hof.
Yeah, right. The Wim Hof method. So I've read that, and I've seen the podcast by Michaela and Jordan Peterson with him.
Yeah.
And I was very interested in that stuff already. So I thought, oh wow, this is interesting. Like a rather secular method that's based on science, combined with like old traditional fasting and prayer, Catholic prayer stuff, and daily readings and reflections, and was like, maybe it really is time for me to do that.
Yeah.
Especially since those Exodus 90 programs, they in Lent, they work through the book of Exodus. And I turned 40 this year.
Yeah.
So the 40 was in that as well. And it was like, okay, that's like a lot of
it's lining up too well.
It lines up perfectly. So and there, I mean, we had like every month we had mass together as brotherhood. And I've always felt drawn to the Eucharist, because I always felt that is something that it means something, although I can't explain really what it is. But I've always felt it to be very important to participate in it, even in state church. And when I went to the mass and I participated in the Eucharist for the first time, I was up in tears, because it really hit me, and it's been doing that ever since. I have this game with, let's say, I have this, it's kind of a funny relationship I have with Christ. I always say, this time you won't get me. And so I go up to mass, I receive the host, I walk back to the pew, and I'm like, maybe he doesn't get me this time. And by the time I kneel at the pew, I'm always up in tears again, because it's such a phenomenal experience, and it feels like God is the healer that is like peeling a thorn out of your flesh every time.
Yeah.
And the moment he pulls it out, it really hurts. But then there's this moment of relief. It's like,
That's beautiful. I love
that's
that
how I've been
description.
feeling ever since. And so for me, I have only this personal qualia, this personal phenomenology that I can relate to. And that experience I have is that when I participate in the Eucharist, if nothing holds, and if I don't ever meet God, and if I don't find I can pray, there's this one moment where that all comes together, and that's the Eucharist.
Wow.
That's like for me where heaven and earth meet, and you realize this is really the thing where God is present. And that's been really a healing and redemptive experience for me. And so I come from this very charismatic background. And I mean, obviously, if people can speak in tongues, why cannot the Eucharist be exactly what the Catholic Church and the Orthodox say that it is? So yeah, that's been my journey, and it's really exciting, because I'm still very in the beginning of being or acting Catholic. But then again, if you look at some commenters, it's like, okay, you already are Catholic by what you seem to be believing and doing. It's not a question of, actually converting any longer. And the good thing for me is that I look back with a lot of grace and faithfulness and thankfulness to my own past, to my own history. And I see that I've gone through, several stages. And I've always felt that I'm not really at home. It's like, okay, I am in that building that C.S. Lewis describes, and I look into that one room, and I'm in that room for a few years, and then I say, it doesn't really.
Yeah. Switch rooms.
Know. Yeah. And the moment that I first participated in the Eucharist was like God saying to me, "Welcome home."
Wow.
And it's like, that's intense. That's intense.
Oh wow, that's a really beautiful explanation. I think I don't hear this a lot that it's so based in the Eucharist or even the experience because the people you speak to in this corner are often intellectually persuaded toward
Yeah.
Christianity and sometimes they don't even come from it or they at least like became more secular or whatever the story may be. And this seems to be really a wrestling with God, but within his home, let's say.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've wrestled several times with God at really, really tough ways.
Yeah.
But so the one thing was the fallout in 1998 where my dad um, professed to us as family that he was openly gay.
Hmm.
And I love my father and we have a wonderful relationship right now, but we had very rough times.
Yeah.
And both of us changed significantly since then. And I've done a lot of reconciliation myself,
Mm.
working through that. And I'm totally at peace with my relationship with my past. I hold no grudges against my father or my mother for that matter.
Mm.
Um, and in that sense, it's kind of, yeah, you when you really grow up, and it took me a long time to really grow up. It's like just 3 or 4 years ago that it feels that I grew up. But that we could talk about that because that's when Jordan Peterson comes into the
Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
um, yeah, but that was a really tough time. And
Hmm.
I mean, back then I was like 15, 16 years old, totally charismatic Christian, full into it, and then something like that hits you
Yeah.
and it really hits you hard.
Mm.
Especially since if you're a teenager, it's like, oh, you're getting interested in, having a girlfriend. And then
Hmm.
you have that. It's not just an issue of faith, it's an issue of gender identity, basically,
Mm.
and orientation. But strangely enough, and I have to say that's grace. It's not what something I did. It's total grace that God gave me the endurance back then and the faith to say, whatever life is throwing at me here, it has nothing to do with God
Yeah.
and all to do with the people on earth.
Mm.
And it's not up to me to be judgmental about that. So that was very helpful.
Mm.
And then my wife and I we were expecting our first child, and it turns out that she had a terminal disease. Uh, and if you know any Greek and you see an illness that has Thanatos in its name,
Mm.
you know you're in for trouble.
Yeah.
And we had that, and so we gave our first daughter the name Leah. And if you look back, that's where we, come back into the name thing that we had at the beginning. If you look at the name Leah, where it comes from, what it means, it's basically translated as the one who has suffered in vain,
Wow.
which is really hard to grapple if you have that experience.
Yeah.
And we only realized that in hindsight.
Wow.
But back then, we immediately knew that God was not, closing our hearts, but actually making our hearts wider through that experience for really knowing that we're serious. We really want to have kids.
Yeah.
And so we had our first son. And that's very interesting because the two names of the two kids that came after are stillborn. I received that in a dream or vision. I don't recall exactly, but it was like, Stefan, your first son will be called Mattes and your daughter will be Liv. And
Mm.
after that, you'll have as many children as you want. And I was like, okay. And I said to my wife, yeah, we have those names ready. Yeah, yeah, we have those names. And so we knew the next child would be a son, and it was. And so we named him Mattes. And Mattes is from Matthias, and that again is from the Hebrew, and it means gift from God. So after Leah, we had a gift from God, which was
Beautiful.
phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Wow.
And then Liv. Liv is northern Scandinavian, and it basically means keeper of the household. And she does keep things together. She's a very strong-minded girl, for sure. Yeah, so that was the second time that I could have been in a very, very tough place when it comes to faith in general. But that has been the second, and then I had a similar experience later on as well. I have the moments where I experienced God the closest and the most intense were the moments where I was at my lowest in my life. And when I was outside the hospital with our stillborn, I had this physical experience of a huge warm hand grabbing and saying, I'm so sorry this happened. And that was insane. And it was also that God said, you know what? There are only very few people that can relate to the aspect of God losing a child. And now you're one of them.
Mm.
So whenever I have had these really tough moments, it was where God really showed himself to be who he is. And he also directly afterwards said, you know what? You'll have to walk by yourself on your own, and you won't feel it every time. It's a very rare experience. Don't expect it to happen anytime soon again. But when you need it, I'll be there. And that's been carrying my faith all the 40 years that I've been on this planet. And I absolutely know that I have absolutely no partaking in it. It's all grace.
Well, thank you so much
Couldn't
for,
have done it on my own.
yeah, thank you for sharing. That's that I think that's the strongest form of faith. For me, what you say that it comes to you in the deepest moments, the let's say the darkest
Hmm.
the darkest times of your life. I think a lot of people experience it the same way. I experience it the same way. Um, yeah, I'm kind of speechless by the story. I think it's a very real story, and I think that pain is so real. I think Peterson often says like, "What is more real than pain?" But I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
that grace that you get that might be even more primal. It might be even more
There's maybe
transcendental.
something even more real than pain, which is the love that is always there when pain is there as well.
Exactly. I feel that.
And so I've really resonated with a lot of what Peterson said, and he kicked my ass, to say it lightly,
Mm.
because even though I've gone through the school of life already, I was at a point where I was suffering from health related anxiety issues, had a really stressful time at my work, which I mean, obviously, being part of migration and refugees in Europe the last 10 years,
Yeah,
it has not been a simple task.
I see.
Let's say that. Um, but I was at this point was really, really sulky and was like, God, why is this happening to me? And why am I feeling so bad? And when will good times come again? And he was like trying to remind me, you've gone through really bad times already, and I've been there. So what's up with that? And turns out that I had become a kind of uh retreated nominal Christian myself. And I had to relinquish and replenish the faith of my childhood and get back into a really more personal relationship with God and with his word again. And so back then, um, out of mere frustration because I've had grown kind of speechless in my prayer. There comes a point being an evangelical or charismatic Christian when it's like, okay, well, you have to put yourself into this position, and then you have to have these emotions, and that stands towards Jesus, and you have to fall in love every time again. And unless you do that, you don't have a really honest and open prayer with the God you love, and then you really won't pray the way you should, and then you become kind of speechless because it's so perfectionistic and individualistic, and you're thrown just back to yourself. It's like, who can tell me whether this is the right prayer? No one can. And that is the risk I see now that actually it lies in the sola scriptura and sola fide. It's like in the end, it's all about this one person looking at the Bible and acting out the faith, whether that faith is going to matter or not. And that was so frustrating that I actually stopped praying at one point. And so then I realized I have to get back into my prayer life, and I didn't know how. So in this kind of traumatic frustration, I just picked up a rosary and said, okay, I'm just going to fake it. I'm just going to do it like they do it. I don't care whether that's real or not. I'm just going to, see the Lord's Prayer and the Creed, and okay, let's do the Mary stuff as well. And strangely enough, things started to happen in my life and in the life of my wife as well. And we were like, okay, maybe something's to that. Let's look a bit further. So I read the book Mary and Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary, um, which is really it's a biblical history of Mary being the second covenant and being the queen of the heavens and all those symbolisms that are in the Bible there. It was a really fascinating. So then I had a lot of before that I had my reservations, and after that I was like, yeah, it doesn't sound too bad actually. It sounds pretty based, especially if you have like 300 pages just jam packed with biblical quotes. It's like that for Protestant Christian is like check.
Yeah.
They've done their Bible. Fine, I'm fine with that. Good. Yeah. And so then while I was doing that, I was looking into the church fathers, and I saw some videos by Ryan Reeves of Gordon Conwell Seminary, and he does a fantastic job at, like, I think it's 30 somewhat episodes going through church history and, the Roman history, the Greek history, and then antiquity and all the church fathers until today. And the YouTube algorithm just threw up a video by Bishop Barron. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's look at Bishop Barron. And I listened to him a bit, and suddenly he starts talking about this obscure Canadian psychologist. And I was like, why in all the world would a Catholic bishop talk about a Canadian psychologist? That's really creating interest.
Yeah.
Like something on my Saliency landscape. So I picked up Jordan's book, 12 Rules for Life, and just read it in one go. And that was like, it was a moment that was like God took me by the shoulders, grabbed me, and hit me and said, you know what, grow up. And I was like insulted. I was like, I'm 37.
Yeah.
Would you want me to grow up? And he was like, no, I'm serious. You have to grow up. Stand up with your shoulders straight. Clean up your room. Do it.
Yeah.
Now. And so I started, incorporating that. And I was reading that book when my wife just was pregnant again with our third child. And that was during lockdown, like early, mid 2020s. So I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts.
Yeah, same.
And 1 year later, I think it was exactly 1 year later, my wife just out of the blue said to me, you know what? Back then, that book you read, I don't know what it was, but you've changed for the better. And I was like, wow, okay, now I need an explanation for what actually happened there. And that's when I started to look for additional material about Jordan Peterson. I hadn't looked at any podcasts or videos from him before that. I just read his book. And then I look at commentaries about Jordan Peterson. And the first one I hit upon was Uberboyo. I mean, he's known as this like Nietzschean, Jungian figure.
Yeah.
And so I started diving into Nietzsche and into C.G. Jung, and that was very intense at one point. And it was talking about Aron and the Red Book and all that kind of stuff. And at that point, my Christian upbringing, came to the forefront again, because it was like my internal heresy alarm went off and said, nope, nope, nope.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, maybe I shouldn't dive into that too deep. Maybe there's a Christian commenter on Jordan Peterson, and lo and behold, there's a pastor from Sacramento from CRC, and he's actually doing comment videos on Jordan Peterson, and that's when I was hooked. So I've never been really hooked to Jordan Peterson, but Paul Vendekle, he got me the first moment I actually listened to him.
Wow, that's so interesting. I find it especially funny now that I'm meeting a lot of people that got almost into to Paul van der Klei. Well, I've never really done the deep dive. I've met Paul. He knows my brother, my father, and all these things. And I see that there's a deep community there and stuff. But I've always
Yeah.
been in the ideas, so I've been completely disconnected from the ground. Let's say with listening to Jordan, Jonathan, and John mostly. And it's really funny to see this world now liven up. And so you listen to Paul, and eventually that also, I guess, got you to this German festival. Is this the first time you interact like in person with the corner or?
Actually not. I've pretty early after I became a member of the Discord server,
Yeah,
Matthias and a few of us got together and said, why don't we do a tour in Germany, do some hiking? And
cool.
it was in my hometown, and I organized that, and we did a tour the um, to the tower of the Stiftskirche, which is like this medieval church building in the center of my town, and it's actually double. It has a double tower. It's also a double church. It's split in the middle. The one part is Catholic, the other part's
Wow.
Protestant. And the Protestants actually wanted to tear down the wall and just make a glass wall so you could see both sides. And the Catholics said, no, no, we won't have that. Because actually on the other side, that's the St. Pius, and they're like I think still holding the traditional Latin Mass. So there's an intense
Yeah, yeah. I hear you.
yeah. So we went up to that tower, and we stood inside the church bell, which is the largest European bell made out of steel. They did that because they didn't want to have the bell stolen during war,
Wow.
because otherwise you would have melted it into like ammunition, but it's
Yeah.
steel. So it's intensely heavy and it's huge, but it's like, well, we have the hugest steel bell in Europe. Okay, fine. I think even in the world. Whatever. So we took that tour, and then we did some hiking, and at the end of the day we went to a Catholic church and attended mass together. And that was a diverse group from Switzerland and southern Germany, and Job from the Netherlands actually.
Oh,
He
you
was
met
as
Job.
well
Okay.
with us. So
Cool.
we caught up on each other there, and I had wonderful conversations with him and others. And then I think 1.5 years, maybe 2 years later, Matthias organized with Cassidy this Landau festival, Bridges of Meaning festival. And Landau is just like 20 minutes drive from my hometown. Um, so I participated in that as well, although not in total, just the one day, because we were in preparations for the baptism of my youngest son,
Mhm.
which took place then on Sunday. And so I've been interacting with them in real life as well.
Cool.
Um, and so it's been the second time that I met people like Paul van der Kley and others. And this year was really a wonderful and intense and intimate experience being in Mannheim, which was the perfect venue.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, Dave and Rebecca, they did a fantastic job in hosting that venue, and Cassidy and Matthias were brilliant in organizing that stuff. I took my little part in it. I was the driver for Paul van der Kley and Andrea with the bangs and Thomas Steininger from the hotel to the venue. So I had
Cool.
my daily podcast directly in the car. It was so amazing. It's like the moment they get into the car and they start talking, it's like, wow, this sounds just like a normal PVK podcast.
Hmm. Yeah, that's super
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I was telling people that for me, Paul is the same in real life as he is behind the
yeah,
camera.
he
Like
is. He is.
it's really like a
And
pastor, you know?
that is to me the perfect example of authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It's like you act out the way you speak the way you think, and you do that no matter what the audience is.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
that's
like
really
that's
beautiful.
like the highest ideal that you could strive to.
Mm. No, I think it's extremely inspiring. I try to act it out in my own life because for me it's like if you're really someone that loves fully, you know, like Christ loves, then you would never make a distinction.
Yeah.
And so I love that type of behavior. Okay, so Did you arrive on the Friday in Germany?
Yeah, yeah.
So you had like a campfire, right? Can you tell me a bit
We
more?
had that. Yeah, we had a campfire, and Hannes immediately grabbed the guitar and then for hours played the guitar and they sang together at the campfire.
Oh.
And I was standing a bit offside because I was talking with Teddy, and then Paul Vanderklay arrived, and then I was like talking an hour to Paul Vanderklay, and then you know how things go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was there for a few hours, but I left, I think, somewhere between 10 and 10:30 ish,
Mhm.
and the rest still had like 2 hours to go. But yeah, it was a wonderful opening
Mhm.
evening there. Yeah.
And then Saturday, what was the schedule like? What did you attend?
I mean, it began with Paul Vanderklay giving a talk,
Hmm.
and then let me think. I think it was Andrea with the Banks having her podcast live with Paul Vanderklay as well.
Yeah, how was that? Because I heard Paul was really happy about that conversation. If it was about the feminine and masculine.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
feminine and masculine. I was fascinated because um one might expect, even for Paul Vanderklay, that he at times is very conscious and cautious about what he's saying in which direction. So he sometimes just opens up the information space and says there are these positions, and that's fascinating.
Hmm.
So it was really interesting to see that he took sides there, and
Ah.
he had a very strong position actually, that argument that he proposed and he
Uh-huh.
argued in favor of.
Hmm.
Um, but he did that in just wonderful spirit. And
Wow.
so I think he was really in his comfort zone there.
Good.
So he did not have any need to, interpret what he said afterwards or comment on it or put it into a different perspective. He was just Paul Van der Clay saying what he thinks straight on.
Yeah.
And that was really wonderful to see. And I think one could hear a few strains in there as well, that it's like Jonathan Peugeot, the feminine and the masculine, or Peterson with the feminine and the masculine, chaos and order. That runs through that as well. And then Louise Perry, of course,
Yep.
uh, and uh, and Mary Herring,
Mm.
and so there's a lot of stuff going on there, a lot of people talking about those issues. And I mean, basically, at the end of the day, it's the based church position that there's a difference between man and woman, and one
Hmm.
can find intellectual arguments for that. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think still to this day holds water. Yeah,
Yep.
it's been for centuries and thousands of years. It's been the mode where it seems that human life seems to flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Even if there are exceptions, and of course not everyone gets everything right at every moment in time, but nonetheless it seems to have been like yeah, the most reasonable way to go forward.
Mm. I'm excited to watch that talk and the other talks because I know that there was more recorded, but
Yeah,
I haven't seen it appear. So I'm excited to see it happen.
yeah, and one can only congratulate to Andrea because she really did a fantastic job, and you know hosting that a conversation and asking the right questions,
Good.
which is something I still have to learn. So learning how to ask the right questions. I love to talk, but I have difficulties asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's it's a craft of its own. I feel that maybe that's also, I mean, a lot of what you speak about is you're made for certain things. Maybe you're made to speak. Maybe you're made to be asked. I'm not sure. But
Could be. Though I do strive actually to put myself. So I'm this kind of neurotic extrovert.
uh-huh.
So that extrovert part always gets me onto the stage, but the moment I'm on stage, I'm thinking to myself, "What the heck am I doing here? Can somebody get me back down again?"
Oh,
And
that's good.
so it's always this to and fro. And what I really want to learn actually is to facilitate conversations where others think that someone is listening to them,
Yeah.
because I feel that people aren't listened to the way they should be.
Hmm.
And I experienced that myself, but I'm really, really bad at listening myself. So I'm trying to learn how can I facilitate those conversations where somebody really has that experience of, okay, wow, he really looked into what I was saying and he really opened space for it.
Yeah. And I also think that listening is well, sometimes it feels like listening is the, I don't know, the more dreaded part of the conversation, but for me it's where I get all the pleasure, because
Mm.
that's where all the gems are for me. And it's so pleasurable because people have so much to say. Like when Peterson says that you can learn from anyone, it's really true. And so
Yeah.
just deeply listening, it's one of the most pleasurable experiences that I have in everyday life, because it's just so interesting. Like I find it really, really fun. So I
It
really
really is pleasurable, but at the same time, it can be a bit of a hassle
yeah.
because I've had that at my work life. There are some colleagues that I really don't like and objectively really don't like, and
Yeah.
most don't like them because they're really strange or downright weird or
Yeah.
complicated or all
Yeah.
at the same time. And still, I find myself open enough to hear something from them and it hits me and I receive it like this was a message directed to you and only.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's like, oh my God, not again.
Yeah.
Why do I have to take? And it's like, don't shoot the messenger. Don't
Oh,
shoot
that's,
the messenger.
yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah, probably he has a point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that listening is also just, it's hard. And I think for me, it's similar to meditation or mindfulness, because you keep having to get back. Like you have a lot of stuff going on internally, usually, especially if you're someone that thinks a lot and has a lot to say as well. Like a lot of thoughts can bubble up. This is why I think, no offense to Jordan, but I don't think he's very good at interviewing people, because he's so extroverted and he's so full of ideas that he can't let people talk for too long
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. He's always overflowing with ideas and concepts and he has to
Yeah.
get it out. It's intense. He can be very intense.
Yeah, that's why he's the speaker, you know. I think it makes sense for him. But it's funny to see him do the interviews now, because I just feel like it's really not him to be in that more passive role. Like he's
Mhm.
really a dragon on the stage, you know. And
But isn't that interesting? Because I mean, he comes from a profession that, by definition, is supposed to only listen.
it's actually, I'm just imagining Jordan right now being like his patience and not shutting up.
Maybe he's just sitting there and saying, "Mm-hmm, uh-huh, mm-hmm." No,
I-
serious. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's like, okay, thanks for talking.
yeah, man, I would love to just have sat in on those sessions, you know. Like I'd
Yeah,
be very,
yeah.
yeah. The whole phenomenon is very interesting of just Peterson and how it rose to such levels. It's really insane to me.
Yeah, I still haven't realized a lot of it because I'm not really, I never participated in his like political style stuff.
Yeah.
Not Article 16C or whatever that was,
Hmm.
nor his Twitter stuff. I'm not on Twitter. I've never been on social media except for Facebook for some time,
Good
but
for you.
I've been like offline from Facebook for the last 8 years, I think it must have been, or even longer.
Well,
Um, and I'm keeping that viciously out of my family.
good.
So whenever my son, he's 10, he has his first smartphone now, which is really just basic stuff and we control everything that he's doing on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And I said, you can do a lot of stuff, and even you're allowed to do YouTube, but don't you dare to think about any social media. I'm going to throw that out the window.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. It's, in some ways, I wish my parents had done that for me as well. But like as a person and even as a kid, I hated to be bossed around, hated to be,
Mm.
told what not to do. I feel similarly about like school uniforms, you know, like I would hate to be in a school uniform if I was a kid, but I really understand, you
That's
know?
so interesting.
Yeah.
You see, I've been I lived 3 years in South Africa, and
Hmm.
we went there to the German school, but it was part of the South African school system, and so school uniform was mandatory.
Mm.
And I went to primary school in Germany, and then I got to the 5th grade in South Africa and stayed there till 7th, 8th grade. And so I had 3 years of school uniform, and then I got back to Germany, which was completely no school uniform. And at that moment I came back, I realized how valuable school uniforms can be.
Yeah.
Because back then what they actually created is we poked fun at the school uniforms of others. It was a red
Ah,
on the flag tribal connection experience we had at that school. It was like, we have the greatest school uniform. It wasn't like, that's just so bad that we have to wear this. We were proud of it actually.
yeah.
And part of it was also that you didn't have to think about what you were going to wear the next day.
Mm,
And so you actually saw only the last two grades, like grade 12 and 13, were allowed to wear what they wanted.
mm,
So it was created to be something special.
yeah.
Yeah. You've gotten your accolades, you achieved something. Now you can freely choose what you want to wear.
Yeah, it makes
I
sense to me.
thought that was really, really good. That was a great experience. So when we came back to Germany, everyone was like, you have to wear these shoes and those pants and those trousers and those jackets. And even the backpacks were like, okay, if you don't have that certain one, it's like you're not part of
Yeah.
the group. It's like I was like, why don't we just get a school uniform here? I think that would be
Yeah.
beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it really makes sense to me. I really noticed it when I started working in a place where we all had the same uniform, and I just realized how much that helped us. That
Yeah.
helped like us to move as a unit, let's say.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I completely agree. Okay, going back to the festival. You had Andreas talk with Paul. I'm very curious about my brother's talk. I haven't been able to watch or listen.
Absolutely phenomenal.
Tell me about it. I'm very curious.
I mean, Aaron is he is very proficient.
Mm-hmm.
He's extremely smart. He has a very kind, charismatic personality.
Mm.
Um, totally non-offensive.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, very witty and smart.
Yeah.
And so this combination already opened up the audience to listen to whatever he was going to say. Didn't matter. He could have said anything. We would have listened. It's like he really has a talent for that. And so then he starts telling the story of Nietzsche, supposedly the anti-Christian atheist Nietzsche. And he says, well, let's put a few cracks into that story. And I mean, Paul van der Klee, if you looked at him and looked at his reaction, he was like, whoosh. He really was like there. He did not expect that talk. He drew in all the information and said this was the most amazing talk about Nietzsche he's ever heard.
Oh,
So
that's really special.
that says a lot about that. And I have to re-listen to that one as well because it was such an intense experience for me that at the Q&A at the end, there were several giving answers and questions, and then I had the possibility to ask the question. And by then, I basically just said, you know what, I'll have to do a reaction video on this. Just too much for
That's
now.
excellent. Yeah. I'm really happy to hear that. I'm very pleased that he did well. He's been working on it for a long time. He's been in like Nietzsche's head for so long, you know. It's really it's really inspiring to see, and it's funny because I think he's becoming more and more relevant, Nietzsche, as a thought
Yeah.
I don't know, thought leader, but his thoughts are really taking hold, and people are really battling with them right now. And I'm happy that my brother was gripped by them then, because now he gets to be sort of like a figurehead for that. So that's
Yeah,
super
and
awesome.
I could relate to a lot of Nietzsche because I mean Nietzsche himself said that's where Goethe comes in.
Hmm.
Nietzsche himself said Goethe was the only Übermensch to ever have lived, which is fascinating. So it already seems interesting to just look at that connection between Nietzsche
Yeah.
and Goethe. Why did Nietzsche think that of Goethe?
Do you
Um,
know why?
that would mean also a very long answer. And actually, I'm in preparation for that. I've been
Okay.
writing on a script for a podcast about Goethe's Italian journey for like 2 years now,
Amazing.
because I'm interested in the intersection between his art and writing and the society that he lived in and the philosophy that he participated in. I mean, he was an adamant follower of Rousseau,
Hmm.
but with every thinker and author, he was like, I read that. Now I've made it my own story. So I have this Goethean Nietzscheanism and this Goethean Spinozism and this Goethean Rousseauism that incorporates something from them, but is unique in its own way.
Hmm.
And he did that to everything that he touched and got in contact with.
Well,
So that's really interesting. And the other interesting thing is that he was open to everything,
yeah.
and he predates Darwin in some sense. He was like, everything is evolution, everything is change, everything's transformation. And he lived that to the end of his life.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's a lot of things going on in Goethe, too many to mention. And I mean, there are fantastic authors and researchers who've done like 200 years of research on him now. If you look at Friedenthal or Nicholas Boyle or Rüdiger Safransky and all the names that have written biographies of him. Just those few biographies, they have like 3,500 pages.
Well,
And I've just read the newest biography, which is from Jeremy Adler, and that's still unique and new in its approach and in what it mentions. Like, okay, you just never reach the depth of Goethe.
wow.
Never. It's impossible. And he's basically the first modern figure because he carefully curates his own profile.
Hmm.
And he does a lot of autodafé. He destroys a lot of his own writings, even the letters that he wrote or that were written to him. And so what we have today is only that which he allowed to remain,
Yeah.
which is very, very modern in its thing. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
the dirt only, curate your profile the best perfect way
Of course.
and then show it to the public. Yeah, so there's really a lot of it in Goethe, and what I mean, Goethe's Faust is the piece of art that basically shows Western Europe at the dawn of modernity.
Hmm.
And Goethe saw all the developments of modernity back then already. And he wrote them into the play Faust, especially not so much the first half, but the second part, which is not read at all. That's a very sad thing. Um, but if you read it carefully, and you will find like, wow, this is just basically modern man. This is how it plays out. That was visionary stuff that Goethe.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen people I really respect, um, who really respect Goethe. I've read a bit of him because we had to for a German class. And that was really that was the first time I kind of enjoyed German class. So that says a lot for sure.
So what did you read?
We read a bit of Faust,
Okay.
and we had like a test about it and stuff. So that was really cool. Um, but now that I'm like years and years ahead, I think I have to redo it, all of it. I actually started his what you call it, Farbenlehre.
Yeah, that's a fascinating part of his as well. Yeah.
What is that? I don't understand it at all. So it's like it's about colors, right?
Yeah.
What was it? What was he attempting there? I'm trying to understand because I started and I.
He was trying to debunk Newton
Mhm.
for his scientism and for the loss of a phenomenological experience of colors.
Ah, okay.
So, as it turns out, and this is where Jeremy Adler gets into in detail, actually, is that science has actually approved Goethe's approach because colors are, of course, part of our observation.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenological experience, and so it's not just whether it's like this kind of frequency of a wavelength that
Yes,
makes
yes, yes.
color.
Like we're
That's
actually connecting to reality.
exactly. So that's
Yes.
just the part that Goethe saw that Newton, not Nietzsche, Newton totally left out.
Yeah.
He did a lot of experiments on that, and like for hundreds of years, they said, "No, Goethe was wrong. He's been debunked." But actually, as today's research turns out, no, he was right. He was absolutely right about what he wrote there.
Yeah, that's epic, and it has some really big um, consequences, I think, for our understanding of reality because if it is actually real what we are connecting to, that means a lot, I think. If it's true on that scale, it's probably true on other scales as well. So for me, it informs my worldview a lot. And it's always a good sign when a thinker is proven right centuries later, I think.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I really want to like, I think we can do whole episodes about Goethe, to be honest, but I'm not.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not read on him yet, so I think I should save that a bit more.
And I have to be honest that even though I've been working on that for 2 years now, I've still just barely scratched the surface.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, now I know what the landscape looks like. I have
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
map, but that map is just so huge. I will not be able to get through it by the end of my life,
That's good.
which is fantastic because I initially got into that project. I was thinking, what is it that I can offer as a unique perspective or topic to this little corner of the internet. And so I'm a German. I have a background in German literature and language. I studied that at university as a minor. And I've ever been, it's so interesting because it aligns perfectly. From my youth on, I've been fascinated with Goethe, and I only realized that doing my research.
Yeah,
I looked back and I saw that, wow, in grade 9, we were reading like Götz von Berliching. And then I was reading his Werther and his Iphigenia and his Faust. And I learned these and these poems and I can recite them to this day. And well, this is interesting. So I've had a history with Goethe already for like 20 years
yeah.
without really noticing it. It was just like part of German school. Uh,
Hmm.
and then you get into that research and say, wow, there's a lot more, than more depth in that.
Hmm.
And so I thought maybe I'll look into Goethe and try to work something. And by now, that's my working hypothesis. I think Goethe creates the secret sacred self that Paul van der Klee talks about
Mm.
during his journey to Italy.
Mm.
That's basically the watershed moment where this comes to this manifests itself in a very, very specific way. And he basically becomes the first modern man that is absolutely about personality, identity, transformation of identity, having a fluid identity
Mm.
that is open to change according to what it experiences and observes. And I think that happened to Goethe in Italy during his a bit more than 1 year. And
Wow.
I'm still trying to find out why that was and where that was and how it occurred. And I have some intuitions about that. And I've read and written about that by now as well, but it's just preliminary work. I could do a whole PhD on that. And I've done a PhD in the past, and I know I'm not going to do it again. So this will remain preliminary, but I want to get it out sometime. Actually, I had a plan to do it by the end of the year. I hope I'll have the first episodes out then,
Good.
and just see whether someone's interested and wants to talk about that, because there's a lot in there that I think is valuable and interesting to this corner.
Yeah. And I've seen your channel. I link it down below for those interested. I know you've uploaded already some other stuff.
Yeah, that was completely different stuff, but yes.
Yeah, yeah. But just so people know, they can subscribe, and then once it's out, they'll be there for it. All right. So you had that, and then you had some estuaries, I guess, on Sunday as well.
Um, I actually led one of the estuary groups,
Ah,
and
yeah.
Aron was in that estuary as well. And I just thought it was fantastic.
Mm.
Um, this method of hosting conversations really does a great job at getting people together, being honest and open, um, not having like a pre-formed position already.
Yeah.
It's not getting into a battle. It's not purely propositional, although it
Hmm.
is a lot of thinky talky, of course. That's, that's what happens when you get intellectually open-minded people
Yeah,
together.
that's what we are in the corner.
That's what we are, right? And still, it got very personal, and
Mm.
I've greatly benefited from that experience. I'm thinking about how to transport it into my own community,
Mm.
and there's this one deacon here. He's the head of the Protestant church, and he's also head of a newly formed working group. They just formed in October, newly formed working group of all Christian denominations in our town. And they've finalized an initial statement of agreement. And I want to get in contact with them and actually propose, why not try out the estuary concept
Cool.
for this working group and for all the churches that are in town?
Yeah.
Because I think we have to realize that, to say it bluntly, the enemy does not lie in our own camp.
No.
It's the outer world. And if you look at the protests in Düsseldorf with 17,000 and in Berlin with 8,000, and people chanting "Make a Caliphate" on German ground and that kind of stuff, this can get really intense.
Mm.
So we need to do some base work in sense making.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that it has to be Christian, but
Mm-hmm.
since there are many Christian communities and churches still around here, why not use it to the benefit?
Mm.
And especially to those that are church adjacent but not church members or church going,
Yeah.
because I feel that in all the churches that I've been, they have not really done a good job at working for the people that are in church.
Mm.
But working for the people outside the church or interested in church, they've been total failures
Yeah.
for the last 30, 40 years. And I think that's detrimental. I think we should do something about that. And I hope that the estuary concept, finds some ground here to open up the conversation space and just realize we all have the same questions, we all have the same fears, we all have the same suffering, and create a new common ground from which on we can actually start to think and talk and create narratives and ideas. And so, yeah, it is kind of a missionary statement there that I'm making. I'm realizing that. But I've always thought that you have to put, some beef to it. It doesn't help staying in the intellectual sphere.
Yeah.
In the end, and that's what I said in that estuary as well, is in the end is you have to have ideas that go through relationships and manifest themselves in practice.
Beautiful. Yeah.
If that doesn't play out, you haven't done the job. That's failure, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to fail. So I'm really interested, and I'm looking at what Matthias is doing and what others are doing with the estuary concept. But I'm really, the longer it takes, the longer I think I have to try to do something on the ground level here and incorporate that not just for myself but for others.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I really took the message home. I didn't go to Germany, but I had some time with Paul and some others. And I really took the message home of practice, really practice what you preach and apply it in your own community, because that's what we have to do. We cannot just be this internet community, um, atomically connecting through the digital network. I think that I also find so much more meaning by just approaching all sorts of people, not just the intellectual,
Yeah.
you know, and that doesn't mean we can't have these gatherings. It doesn't mean that this is not a good thing. It cannot be the center. It can be a part of our the forming of our thoughts and our practices, let's say. But then we actually have to implement. And to me, that's the most exciting part. That's what I live for every day. So I'm excited to see it develop more and more. Um, and yeah, it's awesome. I'm happy
And I
to
mean,
meet people
part
like
of it
you.
is like when we talk about it and it goes public, that's for me actually intentionally. I do that on purpose because it puts me under a judge.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if I wouldn't have written into the German language said I'm planning a podcast about Goethe, I wouldn't have written any page to this day.
Yeah.
But it's like this, it has been this nagging thought in the back of my head that I promised back then that I'd do something, and I've, pursued that. I'm not finished yet, but I have to reach the goal
Mhm.
because I said something in public.
Yeah.
And so that makes me, responsible for actually
Yeah.
carrying it out.
They're accountable. Yeah, it's beautiful. I I'm really happy to have a bit of an introduction to you. I think it's very important to have that in general before I get to speak to people more deeply in what they're most interested in. I'm really happy about the Goethe connection because I'm just happy that there's someone who really spent time on him. And like you say, like you can really only scratch the surface in a lifetime, you know. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
extremely exciting.
yeah.
Um, I want to say that I really, even though you say you find it hard to listen, I think you're really good in the conversation and
Thank you.
saying
Thank
the
you.
right things and listening well. Really, I really
I
appreciate it.
have to give that back to you, and I've rarely seen a video by someone I don't know and immediately added the channel. And
Mm.
with you and Aaron having that conversation just a few weeks ago, where I made my comments,
Hmm.
it was like, okay, I'm in.
Thank you so much. I really
So I
appreciate
think
that.
you two are really doing a fantastic job, and it's absolutely wonderful having conversations with you.
Hmm.
And this is part of what I think I realized as well. Is on the one hand, I want to put things into practice where I live in my own community, but at the same time, I'm always very, very thankful for the internet and the possibilities that it has created.
Yeah.
It's really been a sort of intellectual homing for me
Mm.
coming into this little corner and having those conversations both in the estuary and then with individuals as well. It's like, wow, there are people that don't necessarily think like me, but they have the same stance towards life and have
Yeah.
questions. And so we can be like the Fellowship of the Ring. Let's see where this goes. Maybe there's some dragon we can slay.
Oh, yes.
And
That would be awesome.
this has been so healing and redemptive for me.
Mm.
Yeah, that I wouldn't want to miss that. So I think it needs both. We need to have those international online spaces that can create those connections.
Yeah.
But that's where my Christian faith comes in. We're meant to be on this planet for something else than ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
So God calls us forward into the community we live in, and He lays out something for us. Everyone has this purpose. And by now, I have some intimations of that purpose, and
Mm.
I know God is working on it. And actually, I've found my peace because I at a point in my life when I was doing my PhD, we were building our home. We had our first child. I was like 180% full time work and still doing in my free time way too much.
Hmm.
Um, and I was always like, God, what are you trying to do with me? What's the goal in my life? What should I do? What should I do? And at one point he said, no, 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 it doesn't work that way. You just don't do anything. Just just stay put, stay
Yeah.
silent.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that can't be it. And I had severe health issues that really, hit me. And then I realized, okay, maybe he's right about that. And by now I know for myself that he's saying, your purpose and task in life is work in progress.
Mm.
It's not done yet.
Mm.
And don't you worry about the goal at the end, because the goal is already that you are you hold yourself accountable to every step of that way.
Mm.
And maybe it's good that you don't know where it will finally lead to, because otherwise you might, stray from that path. Maybe just keep focused.
Yeah.
That's where Peterson actually comes back in. It's like, all right, clean up your room, do the thing directly in
Yeah.
front of you.
Do what's
And from
possible now.
from that, some things will flow and develop that you couldn't imagine and did not expect. And suddenly you realize, oh, maybe this is what God was up to with me all the time. And for the time being, that works out. And then at one point, he basically says, "Nah, that wasn't it, but it's on the way."
Yeah. That's beautiful. I have greatly enjoyed piercing into not only your mind, but your relationship to God. And that's a really, really interesting one. I really must say that I see how alive it is. And the wrestling is
And
real.
I always fear that it's close to dead, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
No, I don't think so.
So that makes me hopeful.
Yeah, I don't think it ever will. I'm gonna have Stefan back on for sure. We've been meaning to do one with also Aron involved. I think
Yeah,
that will be really fun. I'm gonna see what you two can work out together. So we'll get that set up.
looking
And
forward to that for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for listening, having me. listening to my story.
Absolutely. We'll put the
It's been very much
channel
a pleasure.
channel down below. Shall I put like Charlie Brown in the title, or are you okay with your normal name? What is the
Um, yeah, you could do like Charlie Brown, Stefan in brackets,
Yeah, perfect.
because that's the name I go by on the Discord server, basically. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, then people will be able to recognize.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you back
Great.
soon.
Wonderful.
Thanks, sir.